So, welcome to Inspire Online and to this interview for National Crime Reading Month. Today we're joined by the author Sarah Ward. Sarah has written 4 highly acclaimed DC child novels: In Bitter Chill, A Deadly Thaw, A Patient Fury, and The Shrouded Path. Sarah was a 2015 Amazon Rising Star, and A Patient Fury was an Observer Thriller of the Month. And most importantly to me, she's a regular visitor to Inspire Libraries. Sarah,
Hello.
welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, thank you. Well, thank you for joining us. So thank you very much. Basically what we're going to do today, I'm going to ask you a little bit about your crime writing, maybe a little bit about the process, and then just sort of a general chat about crime in general. And I'll probably try and get some recommendations from you at the end, I think. So
Brilliant.
Brilliant, superb. So straight off, you're the author of the DC Child books, and for those that may not have read them, can you tell us a little bit about your books and the lead character, DC Connie Childs?
Yeah. So my books are set in the Derbyshire Peak District where I live. It's a great area. It's predominantly a rural population, but we have lots of tourists that come in, so there's a nice diversity of characters. And all my books have a crime that's set partly in the past. In my first book, In Bitter Chill, it was the 1970s. My next 2 books, the crime took place in the 1980s. And in my 4th book, The Shrouded Path, the crime goes all the way back to the 1950s. But they're contemporary crime novels, so they're set in the present day, but the crime that they're investigating has happened decades before, and for some reason it comes back to haunt whoever did it, or it gets rediscovered. And I love that because it's the idea of crime doesn't disappear. The impact of crime goes on for decades. I write the books in using alternate chapter points of view. So one chapter is written from the police point of view, which is usually my main detective, Connie Childs. But I also have an Inspector Sadler, so sometimes he narrates that every other chapter. And then the alternate chapters are written from the point of view of somebody connected to the crime. So in my first book, it was Rachel who was the victim, but sometimes it's the sister of the victim, or the daughter. In The Shrouded Path, it's the daughter of the victim, and they tell it from the non-police point of view. So it's sort of, they are police procedurals because you get the police procedure and the investigation, but it's also, I like to sort of talk about the impact of crime on a community and in the family, so they also have that sort of non-police points of view as well.
Oh, superb. So I mean, you say you set them at least partially in the past. I mean, you've had the 50s, the 70s, the 80s. Do you have to do any research for that? Or was that just some? I mean, do you research those periods, or?
So the 1970s, I remember, and so I wrote, and my character is a child in the 1970s, so I just used my own reminiscences, and the same for the 80s. In particular, my second book, my character's a teenager in the 1980s, and so I remembered being a teenager in the 80s. When I wanted to do the 50s, I don't remember the 50s, so I used to ask people what it was like, and in particular, my characters are school children, teenage school children in the 50s. And so I asked a lot of people of my mother's generation, what was it like to be a teenager in the 50s? What did you listen to? What did you wear as uniform? What was school like? And so I do most of my research by talking to people, because I'm not doing the sort of dim and distant past, although I use lots of websites for things like names, because names are often generation specific. So especially if you were born in the 1940s, for example, and you're a teenager in the 50s, you have a specific name set that aren't particularly being used. So I do sort of see what was the most popular name. And then for my village, because I have a fictional town for my Peak District town called Bampton. And it's a mixture of Bakewell, Buxton and Cromford. But for my village, I thought, well, I need to have a fictional village. So I went on an old map and found an old village called Cold Eaton, and I used that as my, it doesn't exist anymore, but I used that for the name of my village. So I do a lot of internet research, but I think there's nothing like the personal touch to actually, make your books come alive, really.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of the reason. Is that maybe one of the reasons you chose to set your books in the Peak District, because you know the area? Or...
Yeah, and at the time when I was writing my first book, I was really influenced by Scandinavian crime fiction. So I was reading an awful lot of Icelandic crime, Swedish crime, and I loved the idea of the landscape being part of the story. And so the Peak District's perfect because, as you know, I mean, you're in Nottinghamshire, which is very near. it's a completely different dynamic. So the summer, it's very busy.
Yeah.
Not now during lockdown, obviously,
No.
but I can park in Bakewell at the moment. But normally when I go to my local town of Bakewell, it's chocker, it's really, really busy. There's a lot of, really nice dynamic. And then in the winter, it clears out and we get a few cyclists through, motorbikes and so on, but mainly we have the place to ourselves. So I love that idea of you could have it different seasons of the year and the crime would be different depending on the season. And the idea that, so my first book's set in the cold. And so again, you'll know what it's like when it's really snowy here, we get cut off. So I can't go anywhere. And you can't do that if you set your book in London, for example,
No,
or even anywhere in the south, really, south of England. So it was a perfect landscape, really, for a crime story, for the type of crime story I wanted to write. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, I mean, you've written 4 so far.
Yes.
So people who haven't read it, can they read them in any order, or is it best to go 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yeah, because there's I have recurring police characters which people like as a series. So if you like reading from the beginning, I think you will see a series arc in relation to my police characters. But because the other chapters are written from someone connected to the crime, that character changes every book, so they can be read as a standalone, because obviously they're not going to have any relationship to the previous investigations and so on. So you can read them. I would say the vast majority of my readers are reading them as a series. And I mean, the thing is, I don't mind not reading them in order. So I've just read Ragnar Jonassen's one of his Icelandic series, and I read the first book, then the third book, and I'm about to read the second. And my husband was saying, they were in order, because actually his start at the most recent and they go back in time as each book. Each book in the series is further back, which is unusual. And I was like, yeah, but I can work it out, can't I? It doesn't really matter.
Oh no! You see, I'm very pedantic with it. I'm certainly on your husband's side. I have to read it in the order, even if it makes no difference. Lots
and lots of readers are like that, and that was a big surprise to me when I first got published, because I just didn't realise that that's what happens. People read books in order, because I can't think of a single series I've read from a long-running series. I mean, the more recent ones, I've read the first book and maybe the second, but like if I've read 10 of a series, I've virtually never read them in order.
No, I suppose when you get to 10, it's quite hard to do it, isn't it? But we do get a lot of requests in libraries for which is in which order, and which is the first book, the second book. And so
well, what was quite funny was when I started reading a Scandinavian crime writer called Anne Holt. I read them as they were translated, and they weren't translated in order. So I read there's a book called 1222, so 1222, and it's to do with a train being stuck really high up. So that's to do with the meterscape above sea level. And when I read it, the main character's in a wheelchair. And then the next book they translated, she's sort of young and fit, and she's just joined the police, and it's like, I know what happens to her because obviously she's injured, because I've just read the previous book. So it's quite annoying when they're translated out of order, really.
Oh no! So your DC Child books, you've got 4. Are you planning on writing any more, or you?
So my next 2 books are historical crimes. So, there was a historical bit in the 4 of them. So my next 2 books are historical. So we'll see after that, because I've finished one of them and I've just started writing the second. And I can't really look beyond the book I'm writing. But I do get lots of requests for Connie Childs. So maybe, I do have a story at the back of my mind. So maybe Connie Childs will come back for the 5th book after that. Or I do have another standalone story I'd quite like to write, so maybe there will be a completely different one, but again set in Derbyshire, because I do like setting my books here. My historical new books aren't going to be set in Derbyshire, so I would quite like to come back here and set my books here.
Quite right. So I was going to ask a little question about, obviously you're a successful writer, but why did you decide to write crime? Was it because you like crime, or was it because it was easy to write, or what brought you to write crime?
Yeah, so I was a big crime reader anyway, crime fiction reader. That was my thing, my go-to read as a teenager, as a child, even as a teenager, all the way through my 20s and 30s. So I really, really wanted to write crime when I decided to write. I don't think I could have really written anything else. I have since done various things, but I think I think you sort of imbibe the structure of the crime novel and about the reveals and so on, because I didn't really go on any courses. I just wrote my first book that became Bitter Chill, and there was something instinctive about having read so many crime novels about how reveals work and how characters work and so on, that I think, you know, most writers are big readers. So that was you know, my first love, crime fiction, really. Having said that, my historical is partly crime, it's partly thriller, but it's partly a ghost story as well. And that's the other thing I read a lot as a teenager. I used to read a lot of crime, and I used to read a lot of ghost stories. And I kept trying to put the supernatural into my Derbyshire series, and my editor wasn't having, wasn't having any of it. So I've put a hint of the supernatural into my historic, which was exciting to do, and that there'll be a hint of the supernatural in both those books.
Oh, brilliant. So, I mean, it's great that, I mean, what I'd have to say is, I sort of knew what you were going to say, because what I've got to say to people watching is, please do check out your website, which is crimepieces.com. It's got, apart from telling you everything about yourself and your book, it's actually got a fantastic book review section, which is, you can sort of see, obviously, that you do like books, you know,
Yeah.
you do love crime, you know. So I do recommend to watch that. And I sort of knew the answer to that, but that's a fantastic no. Now, going on maybe to your writing process, you said there that you just sort of went ahead and wrote your first book, and
Yeah.
you know, I was just wondering, when you set out to write a book, do you know the plot, you know who the murderer is, or do you just sort of, I wouldn't say make it up as you go along, but yeah.
Well, lots of people do, yeah. So when my writing process has changed. So when I first wrote in Bitter Chill, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and I started off with a premise, which is two young girls get in a car in the 1970s, and later that day, one of them is missing, and the other is found but can't remember what happened to her. And it literally started with that premise and seeing where I went with it. And then for the rest of the books in that series, that's what I did. I start with a different premise each time, and I just keep going, and it begins to, you sort of, characters begin to form. You begin to think where the crime might have happened, the origin of the crime, and who might have committed it. With my fourth book, it went spectacularly wrong. When I first started doing it, I got 30,000 words in, and I thought, no, this isn't right. And so I junked it all. And that was a big lesson in kind of, there's a big risk in doing it like that.
Yeah.
But then for my historical, I wanted to change publisher. And for that, you can't say to them, I've got this great idea, and this is how it starts. And then, well, you just have to wait and see. You have to actually plot it out for them to buy it. So I sat down and actually plotted the whole story for my gothic thriller. And it was a revelation, because it made the book so much easier to write. I'd got all the complicated bits of plotting I'd already sorted out. So I then did it for my next book. So the book I'm writing at the moment, it's all been plotted out. I know exactly who's done it and so on. And it is so much easier to write.
Is it?
It is. And I've since started doing some audio scripts, which we were talking about earlier. I can't say too much about. But again, I have to plot them out because they're commissioned. You know, they say, would you like would you like to do this? Do you have any ideas? And so you give the idea and say, oh, that's good. Can you now plot it out? Give us the whole storyline. And it isn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And if I'd known it wasn't as hard, I might have done it with my previous books. So now in the future, I think I would always try and plot it out, because it does make the writing so much easier, really. And you can change it. You can change it if if it doesn't work during the writing process.
So I imagine it's sort of a lot quicker when you've got it plotted out, or is that?
Yeah, it is. There's a lot less going back and trying to, sort of work things out. Someone's stabbed, and then you think, oh no, stabbing doesn't work. They'll have to be strangled or so. And you really work that out. And you can still have fun with the writing, because even if the book 5, the Quickening, I had a 5-page synopsis. So I had a huge synopsis. In fact, I think it might have been 7 pages, but there was still lots of freedom to do all sorts of things in between. But I always knew I had to get to the next plot point and the next plot point, and that was just so much easier. But I totally understand people who don't do that and just wing it, because I winged it for my first 4 books as well.
I mean, thinking about your upcoming books, you've been mentioning it a few times. We're interviewing you today as Sarah Ward, but I guess in the near future you might be doing some interviews as Rhiannon Ward. If you
Yeah,
could
so
tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, so here's I've got it. The book's not been printed yet. We haven't even got proofs yet because of lockdown. But that's the picture of The Quickening, which has got a lovely, lovely cover.
Yeah.
It's coming out at the moment, I think, in August, 20th of August. And I've used my middle name. So my middle name is Rhiannon. So my parents are Welsh. And my mum always wanted to call me Rhiannon, but she thought, this is the 1970s, she thought, the English, we were living in England, the English aren't going to be able to pronounce Rhiannon. Of course, we've got much more multicultural since the 70s. But so it's using my middle name, so it still feels like me. It's not a complete pseudonym. So I'm using Rhiannon Ward, and it will differentiate it from the Derbyshire books, which is great. And it's set in the 1920s, and my main character is a photographer called Louisa Drew, and she goes to take photographs of a big country house that's being sold because the heirs have died in the First World War. And while she's there, she thinks she's seeing a child in the grounds that the parents can't see. And they're not the parents can't see, sorry, that the rest of the house can't see. And also, in the late 1890s, it was the site of a famous séance. Yeah. And people are coming back to recreate that séance, and she unwittingly gets involved in that. I can't say too much more, but there's a slightly sort of gothic feel to it, really. And it was great because I actually wrote it in the first person. So all my Derbyshire books are written in the third person, which I love.
Real change, yeah.
Yeah, but because I wanted, one of the main thrusts of the book is, do you believe Louisa? Is she seeing that child, or is she imagining it? And I think for that to work, you need to get right inside her head. So I wrote it in the first person, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm writing my next book in the first person as well. And I will write anything historical in the first person, I think, just again to differentiate between the third person in my contemporary novels.
Superb. And which have you enjoyed the most, the sort of the crime series or sort of the newer kind of?
Of all the books I've written, I think The Quickening is probably my favourite at the moment. But then I always think the book I've just written.
It's an unfair question. It was a very unfair question.
So. In your head, so yeah, I mean, it is my favourite at the moment. But I do love my Derbyshire series. The thing with the Derbyshire series, because I had recurring characters, it was dead easy to work out who does what. I mean, I always had a new crime, and I had a new person telling the story in alternate chapters. But I had my regular characters, so I think, Sadler would do this and he would say that type of thing, and Connie would do this. Whereas with the standalones, I have to make everything up right from the very beginning, and that's great in a way that you can do absolutely anything with your characters, because obviously with a series you can't kill anyone off, and your regular ones, well, sometimes people do, but otherwise that's them gone. Whereas with a standalone, you've got to you can do whatever you like. But it was then also quite difficult because I had to, completely make up a whole set of characters. But I did enjoy it. So my favourite at the moment is The Quickening. But yeah.
Sorry, it was a very unfair question. So you said you're working on another book right now. How's that? Obviously, we're in lockdown at the moment, which will massively date this interview straight away. Has that affected you? Is that in any way with the way you work, or is it just business as usual?
No, it's affected my productivity. I think I've seen a lot of writers say, my life hasn't changed that much because of lockdown, because we spend a lot of time in the house. That's true, but we're not in isolation from the rest of the world. Like everybody else, I'm obsessed by the news. I'm obsessed by the daily figures. I do spend a lot of time because I'm involved in lots of different festivals, and I spend a lot of time. I come to Nottinghamshire Library and so on, libraries and so on. So I do go out and about, and I really enjoy that. I enjoy meeting people, and I had quite a full summer programme that I was going to be writing around. And with all those gone, you suddenly presented with a blank space, and that should make you more productive, but it doesn't really. And sometimes partly I sit down and think, oh God. And the other thing is, because I'm doing historical, I've got to do a lot of research, so much more research than I've been doing for my Derbyshire books. And all I can do is either look online or buy books occasionally from Amazon. I can't go to the libraries, so I went to Buxton Library, my local library, to do a lot of research for the Quickening. I went to the British Library to find some, you know, sort of original documents about being a photographer in the 1920s. I can't do any of that for my book at the moment. So I'm thinking, is there a bit of a gap? So my main character in the book I'm writing at the moment is a Quaker.
Yeah.
And I thought, I know quite a lot about Quakers, and it's set in the 1860s, so it's even further back. And then I thought, there's some things I don't know, and I'm having to leave gaps. So it is for me to go back and sort of do the research afterwards. So actually, it's not quite as easy as I thought it would be. Having said that, when I have a deadline and when I have something to do, I am still doing it. So I had somebody got in touch with me and asked if I'd like to do a pitch for an audio drama, and I did that in the morning. Then I wrote my 1,000 words, because I try and do 1,000 words a day. And then I had some queries back on the Quickening about the proofreading, and I did those. So I am sort of working as normal, but I wouldn't say it's a massive explosion of creativity, and I suspect other writers, I think the writers who are being very productive are the ones that are sort of being really focused and thinking, well, I'll just do it anyway, and I'll be, you know, I don't think anyone is feeling particularly inspired by the current crisis, because it's affecting us all, isn't it, really? We've all got elderly parents, and my mother-in-law was due to come over from Ireland. She's stuck in Ireland on her own. You know, everything that I had my 50th birthday on my with my husband. You know, just sort of you know, no cake even, because I'm rubbish at cooking. So we didn't even have a cake. You know, it was just like And there's lots of conversations about what we're going to do once lockdown's over. So yes, I am working, but I don't think it's this great, you know, creative space at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I can totally appreciate that. It's just horrible, isn't it?
It is.
As I said, the interview is for Crime Readers Month. I thought if we could just ask you maybe a little bit about your favourite crime, that kind of stuff, if that's okay. So pretty much straight away, who do you view as sort of the greatest crime writer, your favourite crime writer?
So I love the sort of the crime writers who were writing in the 60s and 70s. So I love P.D. James, I love Ruth Rendell.
Yeah.
They're both big. I'm big fans of them. Contemporary crime writer called Fred Vargas, who's a woman, a French writer. I love the books of Ellie Griffiths. So I haven't read her latest one yet, but that's the series I sort of go back to. I read a lot of Scandinavian crime fiction, Icelandic crime fiction, like Ursa Sigurdardóttir. I love her novels. I've just read a new debut, a debut writer called S.R. White. He's set in Australia, called Hermit. That was really good. So yeah, lots of contemporary crime novels as well. I love.
Fantastic. I'll put you on the spot now. Do you have a favourite crime book? Do you have a favourite book that maybe you'd always want to go back to, or?
I love. Of all the books, I love Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, and I've reread that over lockdown. Yeah, I mean, it's not just crime; it's all sort of things, but it's quite dark and it's very gothic and it's beautifully written. So that would possibly be my favourite crime book. Yeah. What about you? What's yours?
For me, well, crime-wise, I probably have to say it's Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes.
I read all those a lot.
And I'd probably be really bland to say my favourite. I'd probably go with the complete works of Arthur Conan Doyle.
Oh, brilliant. One of my favourite crime novels is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. I mean, it's more a spy novel, but I could go back and reread that tomorrow, you know. I just love that as well.
Yeah, I've been going back and reading books over the last few weeks, books I've read previously. I don't know if it's a state of mind or I just want something that I know is going to make me happy. I'm not sure. So I've been reading books from the past. So I've been reading Len Dayton and Adrian.
I love Len Dayton. Yeah, Spy trilogy. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Spy trilogy. Yeah, so I'm reading London Games Set a Match. You know the.
Yeah. There's three trilogies, aren't there?
Yeah, the first two are really good, and the last one, Faith, Hope, and Charity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It feels like maybe that one was for the money, maybe not quite so. The first two are absolutely brilliant. So.
Because there's that was televised, wasn't it? And you cannot get a copy of that television series for Love. I mean, Ian Holm as the main character.
I never knew the name to
And
the series.
yeah, and you can't find it anywhere. I don't know if they've been deleted or whatever, but I'd have loved to have seen those.
I'd like us to make another one because I was really disappointed with SSGB when they did that a couple of years ago.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because I quite like the book, but I didn't quite like the TV series.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
But anyway, so actually talking about TV series, what is your favourite TV series or film based on a crime novel?
Based on a crime novel. I love the old Miss Marples, you know, the Joan Hickson Miss Marple.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she is perfect for Miss Marple, and I absolutely love them. I've got the box set. I love Inspector Morse. I think the TV series is better than the book Colin Dexter books. I mean, I like the books, but I think the series is just second to none, really. But in terms of a recent crime, I've been watching some Netflix during lockdown, and there's a German TV series called Dark on at the moment. I really recommend it. It's a crime series, but there's a sort of time travel element to it, and the time travel is really good. It's not like it goes in the past, not the future. So yeah, really good. I recommend that.
I'll have to look out for that one. I'll have to look out for that one.
Yeah,
I'm going to write it down. There we go.
Yeah.
And finally, just a very quick one, because we've got people watching. What book would you recommend to people to read? What one book would you say you might not have heard of it? So go and read it.
So one of my favourite books in the last couple of years was a book called Scrublands by Chris Hammer. So he's based in Australia. So he's an Australian writer. And it starts off, and I use the opening chapter to teach with, because I teach crime fiction as well. Mm-hmm. And it's a priest who comes out of his church and starts shooting some of his parishioners.
Oh, wow.
And you think, where is it going to go?
That's a start to.
And then the next chapter is a journalist a year later coming back to report on the crime. And I think it's one of those things that you think, I have no idea what's going to happen, but it's going to be a great story, and it is a really, really good story. It's called Scrublands. I recommend that.
Yeah, I'll write that one. So that just sounds like a start that just really grabs you at the beginning.
It is.
Oh, thank you very much. And I was going to say thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you for joining us for this short interview.
Well, thank you for having me, Chris. Good luck with all the other authors you're interviewing for lockdown. Thank you for doing this. Appreciate that.
Oh, no, thank you very much. And what we'll say is please do go and check out your website at crimepieces.com. It's great just for people looking for inspiration for different books. Again, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us.